everybody. I am Jacquie Cohen Roth, founder and CEO of CannabizMD and sister social enterprise TPED. Welcome and thank you for joining me and colleagues today for the kickoff of our monthly webinars, which focus on a particular disease state or disorder and how medical cannabis can or cannot effectively treat it and the research behind it. Today's cannabis webinar focuses on chronic pain, medical cannabis clinical application and research. In 2017, while considering a pivot from the traditional healthcare industry to the cannabis industry, I saw that there was more information available to the recreational cannabis user than there were to healthcare providers. There was a significant void of renowned and well-regarded cannabis science education for providers and researchers for that matter. I made that pivot and CannabizMD was born. I launched CannabizMD with the mission to shift the paradigm where for the most part right now, the education of the information regarding medical cannabis use is coming from the patients and going and flowing to the providers, versus the way that it needs to happen is from the provider flowing to the patient. And so that is the mission behind medical cannabis, and that's why we're here today. Special shout out to my fellow classmates from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. Exciting to have many of you join us today, and I'm sure you're going to be ripe with questions once we get through our discussion. I have a couple of housekeeping notes. The chat room is not visible to me or to my discussion colleagues. So if you would, please put your questions into the Q&A box, and my colleague Sharmila Klee will be managing those, and we'll open up those questions for answer at about 3:45. I'm very grateful to my colleagues that they've graciously agreed to stay on a bit later than 4 o'clock, our scheduled time. Let's start off with our program. So as most of us in the industry are well aware that with the election just a couple of weeks ago, there was a green wave across this country. There are now 35 states in the US that have a medical cannabis program. Of course, they're not going to launch immediately. It takes them time to get up and running, but it's pretty significant, particularly South Dakota, which moved forward with both a recreational or adult use and medical cannabis program at the same time. 4 out of 5 US territories have a medical cannabis program, as does Washington, DC. 13 other states have a more restrictive program regarding THC, that is the cannabinoid with the psychotropic effects. Adult use or recreational use is now legal in 15 states, and many more states are probably going to be dominoing, with a domino effect becoming legal in the next several months as new legislative sessions begin. So what this means is that 1 out of 3 Americans have access to legal cannabis of some sort. And we're not even talking about the illicit market. So onto our program. In 2017, there was a landmark US study reported by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that stated that there is substantial evidence that inhaled cannabis is effective for the treatment of chronic pain, and moderate evidence that oral mucosal cannabis or cannabinoids improve short-term sleep disturbances associated with chronic pain. 20% of the world's population reports chronic pain. That is a significant number of people. It's the #1 reason why providers in the US recommend cannabis and providers in the global markets prescribe medical cannabis. Recent studies suggest that 45 to 80% of individuals are seeking out medical cannabis for medical purposes due to the treatment of their chronic pain. Chronic pain is intertwined with somebody's personal well-being, their professional well-being, and it also impacts our healthcare delivery costs. With the rapid increase of use of medical cannabis, there is concern regarding the specificity of its therapeutic effects and the motivation of its underlying use. In other words, the stigma remains. Because cannabis is a Schedule I drug, providers and patients are dangerously short-termed on the ability of research to conduct those necessary double-blind, gold standard studies that are so needed and most healthcare providers rely upon. That said, there is a plethora of observational studies underscoring the National Academy's report. We're going to discuss some of those studies today. I'm very excited to have my experts join me. And now if you would, please show yourselves, and I'll make a brief introduction and have you introduce yourselves. Very dramatic. Greetings. So we are across the US. Let's see, Dr. Jakobus Ziburkus, if I have that right, otherwise known and much more easily for me to manage as Dr. Z. So if you would please briefly introduce yourself and share what your area of expertise is. And you need to unmute yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jackie, for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be here with other experts as well as all of the ones that are tuning in. I am by training a neuroscientist, so I'm a neuroscience expert. Most of my studies and research have been in neurological disorders, focusing on epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease, and traumatic brain injury. Also cannabis and cannabinoid formulation expert, having dealt with multiple formulations that I've created and have commercialized through a company of my own. So currently I'm an associate professor at the University of Houston. And my expertise today would be offering some knowledge on pain and cannabis, cannabinoids, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, and I would encourage everybody, we'll share this later, is you have a tremendous TED Talk on the neurology behind medical cannabis. Dr. Dahmer, Dr. Stephen Dahmer, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Please introduce yourself to our guests.
Echo what Dr. Z. Thank you, Jackie, for putting together such a fantastic platform here, an opportunity to share what we've learned. Very excited to join the stage with Dr. Klumpers, Dr. Z. Look forward to learning even more from them. I'm a board certified family physician. I've practiced family medicine for nearly 2 decades, and so my bias is really looking at the macro, focused on the patient in front of me and how does everything that we do in medicine distill down to that patient. For the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of being Chief Medical Officer of Vireo Health, so overseeing interaction with physicians, physician education of our own team, and dispensation of cannabis to tens of thousands of patients. I think we're over 80,000 unique patients now. And so very intimate frontline experience with our team in interacting with those patients in creating this medicine from the plant, the first time in my career that I've done so, and utilizing all that I've learned in the past 5 years combined with that background in integrative medicine and studying medicinal plants to take that next step in deciphering even better what might help someone with their chronic pain.
Yeah, thank you. And so you are our panel member that is literally hands-on with clinical treatment. Dr. Linda Klumpers, I'm delighted to have you join us today, and I believe you're based in Denver today. So if you would take a few moments and share your background.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me here, Jackie. And it's hello everyone. I can't see you. That's always the strange thing here. With, but I'm glad it's live. I just came from a pre-recorded conference session, and this is much better because we can actually all interact. It's also fun to be here with these 2 great experts, Dr. Z and Dr. Dahmer. So it's really a pleasure. But about myself, I have a master's in neuroscience and a PhD in clinical pharmacology of cannabinoids. I've been studying cannabinoids since 2006 now, and nowadays I still study cannabinoids and I do education via one online platform called Cannabis, and via a partnership, mostly R&D consulting for cannabinoids called Verdian Science, together with Dr. Michael Tegan from Florida.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to have you join us and get into our discussion. So looking at what time it is, we're going to get through a lot in a relatively short period of time. So the goal today, we're going to talk about medical cannabis versus opioids, chronic pain and stress. A very exciting study was published in September, focusing on the fastest, older adults, the fastest growing population, terpenes for chronic pain, and if we have some time, novel administration methods. So I'm going to kick this off with Dr. Klumpers. This is a coursework, but if you could deliver just a few minutes, how exactly medical cannabis works on the body to relieve chronic pain.
Yeah, that's certainly a course full of work. Okay. I think, yeah, before starting to explain how cannabinoids work on pain, maybe it's also good to just think about what pain is and how pain, is where it is. So pain, of course, happens on various different levels in our bodies. Think of, for example, someone who has lost an arm or a leg and still has pain in that arm or leg at specific locations. So that already indicates that pain does not necessarily needs to be localized, but it can also occur in the brain itself. Pain happens on various levels, on the brain, in the spinal cord, at the pain site itself. And actually you have to compare the cannabinoid system. It is a system that is quite omnipresent. It's everywhere in our bodies, and so it also affects pain several levels. So I think that that's really important to understand. There's so much we're going to talk about, but that also indicates a little bit why would it work for someone but not for someone else, etc., etc. So back to how does it work. So on the brain level, there are various nuclei in our brain, locations in our brain where there is a particularly high density of the cannabinoid type 1 receptor. Also the cannabinoid type 2 receptor, so CB1 and CB2, these are the places in the body where cannabinoids bind to and where the effects are created. They are both important in pain response. There are certain locations with a higher density of these receptors. I just mentioned CB1, and these are locations in the brain where pain is being processed. So one location, for example, is the amygdala. That is a nucleus that's involved in, let's say, very primitive emotions and also pain perception, where the cannabinoids actually affect pain. And on the level of the spine, there are certain areas in the spine where cannabinoids are able to suppress the nociceptive processing that happens in the spine. And next to that, there are also CB2 receptors in that spine present, where the neuropathic pain also associated with inflammation can decrease. And we haven't talked about that yet, but inflammation is a very big component in the cause of pain, and also thereby, if you're able to influence that inflammation, you're also able to suppress that pain. Well, going more down to the sensory nerves, also there, the cannabinoid type 1 receptor, if it gets activated, it is able to sensitize the effects of the molecules that modulate the pain there, the neuropeptides. So on the brain level, on the spine, in the sensory nerves, and also in the inflammatory cells, the cannabinoid system is very active in all of that. I hope that answers your question a little bit, Jackie.
Yeah, we'll find out. And again, I put you on the spot because again, it is a coursework in about 3 minutes time or less. Dr. Dahmer, I'm going to toss it over to you. You are part of a study that is focused on medical cannabis and opioids. And so prior to sharing the study's goals, if you would please briefly explain the difference in how cannabis works on pain versus opioids work on pain.
Yeah, I think that just to kind of piggyback on some of what Dr. Klumpers said as well too. I think it's very important to think that this is a very unique substance, that it's rare that we have something that treats in all three areas, in the central, in the nervous system, and in the periphery. And I think that, you know, the other important aspect of cannabis, you know, in terms of the treatment of pain, and when we talk about opioids as well, that's very different, is its impact on associated states of pain. And again, when we go back to the patient, this is what I see quite a bit, and that is its impact potentially on sleep, on anxiety, on so many of these other conditions that we see go hand in hand with pain. We recently had a webinar on painsomnia, and I found it very interesting as I did research, is we don't have a medical term for that. And nor is there an ICD-10 diagnosis for the pain that's, the insomnia that's associated with pain. And yet we find it so incredibly prevalent. And I think that's the exciting thing about this plant is the potential many different ways that it can impact the pain, from the central to the periphery to the central nervous system. We do know there's a lot of opioid kind of overlap, and we do have good evidence showing that it can potentiate the impact of opioids. And that's one of our exciting ways that we may potentially reduce the use of opioids. And Jacquie, I'm not sure if you wanted to get me to get into the research a little bit and discuss.
Yeah, if you would, yeah, just share what the study goals are, or goal is, and I believe what it launched last year. Is that, yeah, and just give us some background, please.
We have two very large clinical trials going on. Both are listed on clinicaltrials.gov. Happy to share any links if needed after this. Maybe before I say that, I do want to just say that, you know, because not only patients are so complex, but this plant is so complex. I put an Instagram photo up a while back that kind of showed the blind men with the elephant with cannabis on the back. And I think in a lot of ways, it's really how we're all feeling our way around cannabis, not only, as Dr. Clemens to the many different types of pain that exist, but how many different forms of cannabis. And we kind of lump it, even in our large scale reviews, lump it all together, even though they're very different. So I just want to preface it with that. One of the first things for me as Chief Medical Officer, seeing that, you know, while we're reaching tens of thousands of patients and there is this lack of good evidence in the United States specifically, was, can't we do something with the patients that we have to support the consults for those patients that come next? And so we did work with Dr. Chinaso Cunningham, who's a principal investigator, and received a $3.8 million NIH study, NIH grant for a longitudinal observational trial. And again, this is a large number of patients. I think we're shooting for ultimately 300 plus patients. We'll be following them for a long period of time with validated measures, from anxiety, validated measures to depression, validated measures to pain, validated measures. All these can be found on our website. And I think there's a good argument right now. You know, I kind of grew up in the area of evidence-based medicine, and that the randomized double-blind control trial is the absolute gold standard. Mm-hmm. When we're dealing with something that is so diverse as cannabis, and also has the ability to impact our mind, as does THC, it's very difficult to create a placebo. It's very difficult to create that randomized double-blind control study for a substance like cannabis that will give us the effect and the results that are needed to guide patients. So the observational trial, I think, is one of our best methods moving forward, better data, evidence, and support for the consults of patients moving forward. The other big study that we have, we just recently launched, very excited about, is called Relief. And Relief, again, is the brainchild. Really want to give credit to Dr. Chinaso Cunningham, that in the United States, you can't do a randomized control trial in a product that contains THC. Even CBD is quite a challenge. And so she had the brilliant idea to randomize patients to a voucher for one of 4 arms. And one thing that we've long been after is really honing in what is the right product and right dose for a patient with chronic pain. And I truly believe we don't know. You go to any dispensary across the country, across the world right now, I have chronic pain, you'll probably get from 100 different dispensaries, 100 different products and 100 different ways to utilize that. So we randomized to this voucher for a high THC, that's a ratio of 6:1 THC to CBD, again, on a whole plant background. These are soft gels. Another arm that's a 1:1, another arm that's a 6:1 CBD to THC, so a CBD dominant product versus placebo that we've created internally, with a very fixed, titrated dosing regimen based on validated measures, based not only on their pain, but also on what is the TSQM-9, and that's kind of their satisfaction with the medication. So really excited about this for the first time, pitting kind of a high THC versus a 1-to-1 versus a high CBD versus placebo in the treatment of chronic pain, monitoring in both of these studies how that impacts opioid use. And I've rambled quite a bit there, so I want to pass the baton. But I just wanted to share. I get so excited about these. We're finally going to get some good answers, and it could take 3 years. That's the hard part of research. It's not, we'll get tomorrow.
Well, a question for you. So what is actually the relevance? So you talk about, it's a 6-to-1 ratio, but in the marketplace, do patients see products? Is that relevant to what patients have access to?
Absolutely. I mean, patients have access pretty much to everything right now. And that's the hard part too. And one of the decisions I had to make is, what is that ratio that we look for? We have many ratios that are available. The good, thing of that is that you can kind of titrate to pretty much any dose THC. And really what we're talking about is an entourage effect, but we're really focusing on THC. I believe that pain treatment really is going to rely on THC when this is all done. That's my bias in my read of the literature, and we may be proven wrong on that, but you can increase that dose of THC according to the titration. So the ratio, I think, is important, and we'll for the first time pit different ratios, because many anecdotal opinions vote for one ratio or another, but we can actually see is that making a difference in a group of patients.
Dr. Z, would you comment on that? Because so my understanding with THC, of course, so that's effective at the CB1 receptor, and then CBD at the CB2 receptor, which is more focused on in the spleen, where inflammation is born, and then again, inflammation being so closely connected with pain. So here we are talking about THC, and can you offer any insight?
Absolutely. I think that a good place to start again is endocannabinoid system. And we have to realize that when we talk about the endocannabinoids, that they're quite promiscuous, that their targets are not just cannabinoid receptors, that they have other targets, and these other targets actually are involved in pain modulation, such as tryptanyloid receptor pathways. They're also involved in regulation of nociceptive pain at the level of the dorsal root ganglion. That's all of the sensory pain perception that's coming from damaged tissues. Now, so endocannabinoids do that. The receptors, when we look at where they're expressed in the brainstem, going back to Dr. Klumpers' description, is that in the brainstem, they're in the nucleus of solitary tract, which is visceral sensations and nausea and vomiting, and the periaqueductal gray, which is analgesia. If you juxtapose it to the opioid receptors, and none of these control your breathing center, the pre-Botzinger center, which is controlled by opioid receptors, and the heart rate as well. So you have cannabinoid receptors and similar locations nearby in these brainstem nuclei here, but opioid receptors are controlling the vital body functions, the breathing and the heart rate. When we talk about treatment with cannabinoids and opioids, I'd like to offer this thing before we get into the ratios. I'd like to say why opioids are so much more dangerous. And the reason for it is we have to go back to the effective dose versus the lethal dose. For opioids, the effective dose is a single 2-dose administration. A lethal dose, 3-4 times of a single dose, is a lethal dose. So where opioids, again, we're having this overdose pandemic, is the vital functions get cut off through the overdose. So with cannabinoids, the phytocannabinoids from cannabis plants. So when you use opioid medications, when you're using cannabinoids, the effective dose, the difference between the effective and the lethal dose is 1,000 or more times. And that 1,000 times of the concentration, whether it's one gummy or one joint or something like this, it has to be consumed 1,000 times in a short period of time to be lethal. And there is no reported lethality from just the consumption or overdoses of cannabis. So now let's look at what THC does. THC, of course, you know, it interacts with CB receptors, but when you asked about the ratios of THC and CBD, 1-to-1 THC and CBD ratio is nabiximols. It's a drug that has been on the market for over 20 years. In UK and Europe, it's in phase 3 clinical trials in the United States. Nabiximols is used in multiple sclerosis to treat two things, spasms and pain. So that's your 1-to-1 THC oromucosal spray. So it's an oromucosal spray in this case. CBD and pain in general, and pain perception, endocannabinoids and pain. Let's maybe discuss that a little bit, because we have endocannabinoids that dull the pain. And we have cases, clinical cases, not myself, but in the clinical world, of an enzyme called fatty acid hydroxylase. And this enzyme is what breaks down endocannabinoids. And it turns out that if you don't encode enough of that enzyme in the body, that means your endocannabinoids levels are higher. Or if you inhibit Fa by exogenous substances, you increase endocannabinoids in the body, you reduce the perception of pain. This goes back to the fact that modulating pain is not only modulating the cannabinoid receptors, it's modulating the enzymes that either synthesize or degrade the endocannabinoids. And when we talk about phytocannabinoids, and we have interactions, it turns out that THC is a negative allosteric modulator of opioid receptors. And that's where, going back to Dr. Dahmer's statement, where there's a reduction, there might be even an effectivity increase potentially. That's what I heard when I was listening to his segment. So it's interesting that you will have THC interacting with opioid receptors. You'll have CBD interacting with tripvanilloid, which is pain pathway. We'll have CBD inhibiting Fa, raising endocannabinoids, again, affecting the pain. It's a very, very complex system to take apart endogenously. And then when you add exogenous things, then it becomes even more complicated. And then when you come to the ratios, then it's really commendable. I think that's the answers will lie for some specific conditions, but it is very complex.
Yeah. Before we get on to that study that I'd like to talk about regarding older adults and medical cannabis use, Dr. Klumpers, do you have any comment to make or anything to add?
Yeah, we can probably go on for hours on one.
Yeah.
I will try to not keep it too long, but I think it's a really good point that both gentlemen have discussed, and indeed. Of course, the body is so complex. It's so complex to understand everything. And yeah, there are lots of interactions between the cannabinoid system, the opioid system. You can try to modulate it pharmacologically, and you have to be really, really aware. I'm not sure if there are clinicians that are listening right now, but need to be very aware also with an opioid treatment what someone's cannabinoid history is. So there have been a few studies already that were published that people will end up needing surgery, and they are cannabis users. They need more opioids for pain relieving effects, probably because they cannot use their cannabis. It's not entirely clear, and I know a professor wants to study these effects, but yeah, also clinically, it's really, really important to understand your patient situation on an individual level.
Yeah, what you said just in that situation regarding surgery. I mean, this underscores again, the critical importance of the need of cannabis science education for clinicians. Dr. Z, I'm going to toss it to you about this study that referring to where medical cannabis and cognitive performance in middle to old adults treated for chronic pain was published in September. It was a cross-sectional study conducted among chronic pain patients aged 50 plus. And besides this demographic being the fastest growing medical cannabis patient population, why is this study so significant? Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
I think that this is, as you mentioned, is one of the highest growing segments in new users of cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
It's baby boomers, it's the 50 plus. And I think that this is probably the group that experiences the most chronic pain. What's also interesting, I think, is that there is this stigma and mystique when you talk about patients and older patients, and the ones that don't mind getting high from THC, they may have had previous experiences in their life. But the new users or the older people that have never used before, this is sort of one of the main questions. It's like, am I going to get high? Am I going to be a junkie now? And so I think for me, the study is significant from, scientific perspective, but also from the societal perspective, showing that older populations are using cannabinoids. They are seeing benefits from cannabinoids. And if you combine it with what is being used for pain mostly now, again, we come back to opioids. So not in this study, but in other studies, there are indications, those are mostly survey studies, so if up to 60% of patients that are using opioids switching to cannabis or cannabinoids. So I guess I didn't really address the details of this particular study, but I think more of studies like this are going to be coming into play. I think there's going to be more interactions that we're seeing between pain medications and cannabinoids. I think that there's going to be combinations of anti-inflammatory and analgesic drugs, Advils, the ibuprofen-likes, and mixes of CBDs and cannabinoids that are going to be entering into the market too, pending studies and trials, of course. So I think I would just let the two physicians discuss the study, if you don't mind, in greater detail, just yielding some time.
Sure. So, yeah, Dr. Dahmer, then, with the impact, I immediately go to, is there, yeah, we're talking about chronic pain, but, cognitive ability, any impact when we start to consider early onset of dementia, Alzheimer's, and then anecdotally, I had read somewhere, it came across my feed of actually there is an assisted living facility in New York or New Jersey that is permitting patient use, which is tremendous. So anyway, the screen is yours to address this particular study and why it's the impact.
Yeah, it's so much to unpack there. I think.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I want to expand a little bit, but I think it really served to decrease stigma, which we all know is just, for me, I've never seen anything like it in my career as a physician, the stigma that surrounds this plant. So I think that first and foremost is probably the biggest takeaway from that study. It's Dr. Zachary Pallas in New York that the Hebrew Home allows patients and residents to utilize medical cannabis. I've had many interactions with Dr. Pallas. He's written up a paper on how it has positively impacted the residents of the nursing home, and well worth looking up if you haven't read that. I think that one of the important things for this study for me is that we know chronic pain negatively impacts cognition, right? We know that a lot of the things associated with chronic pain can negatively impact cognition. We know, in our elder population, it's a concern for all of us as we age. Anything that would negatively impact our cognition. So we're always on the lookout. Is there a third whammy, a triple whammy that could add to those that would even worsen that? So I think it was very reassuring to see that. The thing I come back to over and over as a clinician is kind of the dose makes the poison, right? And that's maybe an oversimplification, but it just is such a brilliant piece of advice from Paracelsus that we need to hone in on, at what point might it impact cognition? And how do we really keep patients in that sweet spot where there is relief potentially from pain or help with sleep or these other, positive impacts of the plant, while not going into that realm of impairing cognition negatively, which again, I think it was reassuring, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this. And I think we do have to be careful as it's utilized in conjunction with many other medications. And we know polypharmacy is such an issue for our elder population right now. I got to be honest, as a physician, I'm excited about cannabis at that potential for reducing polypharmacy. And maybe I'll just close this one up a little bit too, is that we worked on research with our elder population as well. Diana Martins-Welsh, a fantastic geriatrician and researcher at Northwell. We did a study also looking at our elder population, knowing it's our fastest growing demographic, knowing that they might be those most exposed to the potential negative effects of cannabis. And it showed too that treated their pain successfully, and it was well tolerated by the elder population. But we hear this over and over. More research needs to be done to hone in on, again, what is that product that is being utilized that isn't impairing cognition and is helping with pain, and at what dose is that occurring?
Yeah, and to my understanding, it does hit when you talked about the dosing, and whatever age it is of the patient age, there gets to be a point where my understanding is there is no more significant impact on the pain, on that level of pain. What happens is that somebody begins to have unpleasant side effect, perhaps of too much THC. Dr. Klumpers, what do you have to say?
Yeah. A few things. So I need to think of which order I'm going to say what. But one thing that has been said a few times already is dose. You also say dose. And at some point, you will start getting a response or not, and you'll have side effects. One thing that's really important to discuss and also to consider as well for treatment is tolerance. Actually, it's two things: tolerance and tolerability. And so regarding tolerance, and that's a very important point with the opioids. There is an effective dose, as Dr. Z said, and then there is a dose that's lethal. The problem with opioids is that lethal dose is not so hard to reach, because at some point people will not feel the pain relieving effects of opioids anymore. They become tolerant. You'll need to either increase the dose or start using another opioid type because of desensitization. With cannabis, something similar happens, but probably not for the pain relieving effects, more for side effects. So it might very well be that someone experiences side effects, does not want to continue that treatment. What you can do is either stay on that same dose, go a little bit back, and I am not a clinician, so I'm not giving any prescription or advice or anything, but from studies, I'm telling here what has been seen in studies. If you stay on that dose for 4 weeks or go a bit back for 4 weeks, after that time, it's very possible that the side effects have actually diminished without affecting the beneficial effects. More needs to be studied. I don't want to say it, but it's true. But that, and it has to be said about those effects and the dose, etc., etc. By the way, according to a professor from Canada, Mary Lynch, who has taken cannabis in the official guidelines for pain treatment. This was years ago, and she told me that they did actually not see any pain reverse pain relieving effect. So actually tolerance to the beneficial effects after 2 years of studying her patient group, which is significant. So that is very, very important and promising. With regards to the elderly population study, indeed, more research is needed. I think it's nice to see a trend, but the group that was studied was very heterogeneous, and also there is no real consistent dosing that we can understand, like what did these people actually get, how did they do it, how often. So I think that this sets a really nice starting point for more studies to be done in the future, for sure. And indeed, one more thing is the side effect profile for the elderly can be different from the side effect profile for most studies with younger people that has been done. Specifically, I already see Dr. Z nodding, balance, postural stability, falling risk is a little bit higher in the elderly population, not necessarily significant, but it's just something to consider that I find important to mention.
Yeah.
I'd like to very briefly add that maybe also when you just mentioned, Dr. Klumpers, the younger population, is that during the brain development and the plasticity period, you could have effects on cognitive function. So it might be interesting because you may not see the same in the adults and you may not see the same in the older adults. And I also believe that this is another area where we are working with University of Houston actually in designing psychometric analysis to understand what happens to cognitive performance, to understand how anxiety and decrease in anxiety can improve the cognitive performance actually. And you're seeing this multimodal effect almost from cannabis and cannabinoids. It would have been also good if there was a little bit more standardization of what the patients are using, you know, and in many different studies, but all together.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point is exactly the standardization of what the patients and how they're being dosed and the administration, which is a tee up for Dr. Klumpers. You were recently awarded, I believe it's a grant by the Dutch government, and that you are going to be leading a study on chronic pain. So if you would please share as much as you can about this exciting opportunity or focus that you have.
Sure, it's super exciting, and I'm just a part of this. So there were actually 3 applying parties together. One of these parties is the Center for Human Drug Research in Leiden, the Netherlands. That's a research organization with a very strong academic focus. A great team there. And then the Leiden University Medical Center is another partner in this as well, and then me. Yeah. So what we're going to do is actually the grant had a few preset requests for this application. So we need to do a lot with relatively little money and time. And it is very focused on cannabinoids, understanding cannabinoids and their response in pain. And a few of the questions that we will try to answer is first, the ratio. Very important, Dr. Dahmer said it already, which ratio are you going to use for which indication? And how do these compounds interact with each other? Because mechanistically, it's very complex, actually. Yeah? Some people will depict THC as this intoxicating compound and CBD as the counter THC that counteracts these effects. It's not one-on-one. It's not super simple because the influence of CBD on the THC-induced effects does not just go via antagonizing the CB1 and CB2 receptor, as might sound very logical, but it's mostly via all kinds of different pathways and mechanisms. There are many more receptor systems, physiological systems involved. But that aside, about the grant. So these different ratios, how are they actually affecting pain? but also the side effect profile of pain. Because if you give cannabis to a pain patient, to a group of pain patients, let's say it will work in half and it will not work in the other half, very roughly. Yeah? The exact number are very nuanced and dependent on which patient group you're looking at. But a reason why some people are not able to continue is the side effect profile. Just as we just discussed, which is very unfortunate. And if you are able to affect that side effect profile by just giving a better ratio so that people are able to deal with this better without taking away the pain relieving effects of mostly THC, that would be great. Some people also believe that THC and CBD will enhance each other's effect in pain. A lot of people believe that that is why Nabiximols, that was just brought up, has a 1-to-1 ratio THC-CBD. That's not necessarily the rationale, but I will leave that there. We can talk about it another time. But this study is really trying to understand how does the pharmacodynamic profile, so the effect profile, look. What does it look like when you give different THC and CBD ratios? They're looking at beneficial and side effects, unwanted side effects. So that's one thing that we want to look at on a high level. Something else is drug interactions, another very important thing. Side effects are very often also caused by drug interactions. A lot of the side effects that are attributed to CBD, because CBD has been studied in very sick patients that typically have other medicines that they are using. A lot of the side effects might very well be due to a pharmacokinetic interaction, metabolism interactions, whereby the level of the other medications that people are using actually goes up, and then you can get side effects from a higher dose actually of the other medication that patients are using. So the drug-drug interaction is a part of this as well. And then lastly, we just said that it's very unclear who is going to respond how to cannabis. That is something that we really want to understand better. And to do that, you need to understand what the characteristics are of the group that you're going to study. Well, we want to look in approximately 200 people with chronic pain. And that's a huge group, and you will not be able to draw any conclusions from that eventually. But a lot of studies you just need to do to understand where there are certain trends. I mean, you can't study the entire population of the world, so 200 patients is already quite a number. So I want to understand how these people have been diagnosed, how they're experiencing their pain, because you can get a diagnosis, but even with the same diagnosis, two people can experience pain very differently. The feeling of the pain can be different, etc., etc. And then there are other characteristics as well that we want to know from them, like simple demographics, but also other effects from tests. Even in THC response, personality plays a role, because that says something indirectly about your neurotransmitter levels. Mm-hmm. And all these things together, called phenotypes, let's say, we will try to understand how these different characteristics, different covariates or phenotypes, whatever you want to call them, how they relate to a good response or a not so good response to the cannabinoids.
Thank you. That's very exciting, and congratulations to you and your colleagues. And Dr. Z, that what with the impact of the neurotransmitters, and as Dr. Klumpers shared her studies, and the neurotransmitters seems like that's an area for your expertise. Any comment?
Yes, I think that when we are discussing pain, and maybe when we're talking about neurotransmitter serotonin, monoamine neurotransmitter would be important to mention, because CBD binds to serotonin receptors. It actually has much higher affinity to serotonin receptors than cannabinoid receptors. And there are reports of CBD helping with migraine pains, which could be linked to the serotonin potentially signaling as well. Again, I think cannabinoids, if we talk about endocannabinoids, then we have to talk about not necessarily neurotransmitters, but the receptor pathways. When we talk about phytocannabinoids, also we have to talk about the receptor pathways. But the fact is that CBD and some of these cannabinoids actually can affect the reuptake of neurotransmitters. So another important neurotransmitter to consider in the brain, serotonin, is involved in many different functions in the brain, but adenosine and adenosine signaling in the brain is very important too. And so it seems that cannabinoids can also influence the levels of adenosine, and cannabinoids can act as reuptake inhibitors. So once neurotransmitter is released in the synapse, it's in the synapse, it gets broken down. A lot of times the same neuron will reuptake that neurotransmitter. And by blocking the reuptake of serotonin or by blocking the reuptake of adenosine, you're increasing the bioavailability of that neurotransmitter in the synapses. And so the interactions are through the receptors, through transporters again. As you're affecting the transporters, you're also affecting the levels of the neurotransmitters in the synapses and the release of those neurotransmitters potentially from the terminals as well. I'm sorry to maybe take a little bit of much time, but I want to tell you this thing. Like when we think about the brain function, CB1 receptors are involved in neural transmission. So when you talk about neurotransmission, they primarily regulate GABA, inhibitory neurotransmitter, and glutamate, the excitatory neurotransmitter. And that's significant because this is fast neural transmission, fast processing of information, and this is CB1 receptors. So they presynaptically cannabinoid binding, endocannabinoid, and phytocannabinoid binding to CB1 receptors will control the release of the excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. That's significant. CB2, although you'll find them on neurons, you'll mostly find them on glia. These are slower processes. These are the processes of the cycling and the synthesis of neurotransmitter. These are the processes of cytokine release regulation and the inflammation regulation. So you always also have to think about that these different receptors have different timelines, the way they act on the body. The CB1 will act faster neurotransmission, CB2 and changes in inflammation or cytokine release is a slower process too.
And spot on to that, and with relevance, two I guess points that I have is talking about these neurotransmitters and the impact that they have and the quick release, both on mental health disease with a higher level of serotonin or dopamine and the relation that that has to specific mental health diseases, as well as then epilepsy, for one, with that quick transmission that you're speaking about. If you share some.
I would just say with epilepsy, really when we're looking at epileptic seizures as the major symptom and one of the major diagnosis points for epilepsy, then you're looking at CB1 receptor most likely regulating the fast processes during the seizure, the slower processes of inflammation that can build up to seizure and build up to degeneration. Again, now you're involving CB2 receptors. As far as the mental health, you know that serotonin is very much involved in depression and depressive symptoms. And so you have actually serotonin reuptake inhibitors or serotonin monoamine oxidase inhibitors that break down serotonin as medications on the market. And so by virtue of cannabinoids and CBD in particular acting on serotonin receptor, now you are entering that whole different modulating, what we call not this fast activity, but modulating activity, slower activity of serotonergic signaling, which is very much involved in mood and mood disorders in this case. As an example, if you talk about dopamine, then, you know, when I teach neuroscience, I say each neurotransmitter means behavior, it means something. It's not just structures, it's behavior. Dopamine is movement, so movement disorder. Serotonin is mood So it's mood disorder. So with dopamine, association with Parkinson's, with tremors, and the movement disorders, again, that's another significant avenue in the interaction with cannabinoids.
Thank you. Actually, Dr. Dahmer, we just have a little bit of time, but here we are coming. I mean, obviously, with the stress that we're all under right now. Certainly, we've there's been the stress in the U.S. related to the political environment. Numbers of the pandemic are increasing, and the impact that stress plays on chronic pain. And what we're also seeing within that industry, or our industry, the medical cannabis industry, is an increase in the use of medical cannabis, that it is effective for treating anxiety. And if you would just, we don't have that much time, we'd like to allow a bit more time for questions, but if you would speak to, again, the application, or I guess that relationship of medical cannabis, stress, and chronic pain.
Yeah, I think appreciate that question, Jackie. I think it's a real hot topic right now, and I think it's more complicated, like so many of these topics, than we want to admit to. And I'm seeing a lot of headlines related to CBD and COVID and anxiety and the mental health related to that. And I think that this, for better or for worse, each patient is kind of on their own in trying to decipher it at this point, because we don't have a good answer. A couple of things that are reassuring is one of the things that really intrigued me about cannabis is its close relationship to the endocannabinoid system that we know is kind of a supermodulatory homeostatic regulator. And you talk about homeostasis, and that really is our body's ability to deal with stress. And Dr. Z and Dr. Klumpers can go far better into the mechanisms by which that might happen. But we do know that so many have been utilizing this plant to offset stress. And I think the conundrum is finding, again, that right dose and that right product that won't cause harm. I will just reflect, I think we're seeing in the industry quite a bit of supersizing. And I think it's natural when we're in pain or we have a condition that is bothersome to kind of to increase the dose, looking for relief from that. And I think one of the main things that is very important for cannabis moving forward is setting that expectation and going back to, kind of adverse events, as Dr. Klumpers was speaking to. I worked in New Zealand for a while, and we dosed metformin. This is kind of an off story, but if there are any pharmacists out there, they'll understand it, at 250 milligrams a day, which is far below what is the accepted dose, because metformin, a fantastic first-line diabetes drug, causes stomach upset. And if you start someone brand new on metformin at too high of a dose and they get that stomach upset, they're never going back. I see a lot of similarities with cannabis. The saving grace of metformin, which you can't really feel diabetes, right? But we knew that if you get to a certain dose with time, your diabetes will be better controlled, and that will save you a lot of complications and even potentially prolong your life. We don't say that with cannabis yet. And so I see a lot of, especially elder patients that come on, they walk into a dispensary and either they're told this one's going to knock your socks off, or started too low and they, I interact with them after. I didn't feel anything, doc. Well, you only tried 2 capsules for 2 days. And that kind of in between of titrating up to that right dose and having the confidence that this will help someone, I think it's so absolutely important. And I changed your question a little bit there, Jackie.
No, but you made a very critical point, is that it is not, well, 2 things. One, you should have said this right at the beginning, medical cannabis is not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything for everybody. Everybody has a different endocannabinoid system, is going to react to cannabis and the dosing differently. And so that is to your point about titrating, and that providers need to understand that, again, there's that adage in the industry, start low, go slow. And there are those models. I think Dr. Russo was the first one to publish that slow and low model. So you made a very important point to that.
I think, unfortunately, when someone's paying out of pocket and they're in pain, it's an easy thing to say and
right.
to kind of back up. And those are some real big challenges we face, in the industry and trying to take our time getting to that right dose.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. This is fantastic. I think Sharmila is going to join us in just a bit. And while she's coming on, We do have a couple of questions, and actually, Dr. Dahmer, you are speaking, and all of you are speaking to pharmacists that I am excited to have a number of my classmates at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy in the medical cannabis program. So let's see. So Dr. Z, I'll toss this one to you. Can somebody speak more on the ENS with the way stress and poor dieting attacks the gut biome, the prevalence of CB receptors within the GI system, and the research supporting cannabinoid therapy for GI dysfunction? Should we focus as much on the ENS as we do on the CNS, PNS? Where are we with recognizing the role of the ENS in connection with the ECS?
So I think that this is a very good question, but it is a very complicated question.
Yeah, it is a complex one.
It touches on several things. You know, central nervous system is complex as it is. It turns out that mesenteric nervous system in the periphery is potentially just as complex and just has as many points of contacts and communication with the digestive system, with the intestines and nerve endings there. It's as complex. Now, what is the connection between the endocannabinoid system and the mesenteric, the CNS and the mesenteric nervous system? So you can think of mesenteric nervous system is connected to the CNS and is regulating the digestive and the intestinal features. Now, it's important when we talk about this is to talk about the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which will hit on chronic stress, and that will hit on the interactions with the digestive system. So hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands. And what happens is with chronic stress and increased release of cortisol, there's also adjustments and changes in the cannabinoids. Those endocannabinoids, their levels of the enzymes and endocannabinoids themselves change in the dorsal root ganglion, nociceptive neurons, if you may, sensory neurons. And by having this chronic stress, you actually induce intestinal pain through this axis as well. So connection of the endocannabinoid system here is CNS, neuroendocrine system, communicating and back and forth with mesenteric system, and the imbalance or upset that is brought about by chronic stress is one of the examples. So we're not talking about Crohn's disease or something else, but chronic stress that brings in hyperalgesia that is basically intestinal and mesenteric driven in a way. Now, to answer this question of how we take this all apart and put it all together, you know, the microbiome, mesenteric system, CNS, ECS, acting in the CNS and the periphery, we'll try. We are all trying.
Thank you. Let's see, Sharmila, what do you see in the chat that I may have missed?
Yeah, there's a question from Jose Delgado.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I am currently learning the principles of drug action and cannabinoid pharmacology. My question is, where can we as students planning to graduate in 2021 focus on developing our skills and the future needs in the developing medical cannabis industry? So I guess it's more of an opinion question.
Yeah, I think that is a question that goes to each one of the panel. So panel members, so Dr. Dahmer, any particular areas that you would recommend students focus on and opportunities when they're the first ones out with the Masters of Medical Cannabis Science?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to give the cliche response to that, and you really want to follow what interests you the most. I think that this is such an exciting history. I've been 5 years, and we joke that it's drinking from a fire hose, and we drink that it's, you know, dog years in a cannabis industry. But the number of opportunities that I see today is absolutely eclipsing what I saw 4 years ago, and I expect the same will be true 5 years from now. So focusing on those areas that intrigue you the most. I get real excited about formulation, which is something I didn't have as much of an interest before, but knowing that a longer lasting delivery form certainly can help chronic pain sufferers sleep through the night, and there are advantages to that, but also makes it much more difficult for a cannabis naive patient to titrate. Yet, the fast acting have higher potential for addiction or cannabis use disorder. And so is there some sweet spot in between? And I think we see a lot of different products on the market now that are the result of varying delivery forms. And I think that will continue to be an exciting area moving forward. And then the other thing that really has piqued my interest lately is data science. You could imagine, as a family physician, I certainly had a background and a lot of my job involved population health and data science, but never have I seen such tremendous potential for impact as there is in cannabis, and utilizing, again, millions of patients that are using this plant, really deciphering, getting to the point, even level of terpenoids, beyond major and minor cannabinoids, but terpenoids and beyond, to then cross-reference that with potentially efficacy data. Data science might be our only chance at resolution of some of these quandaries. I'll throw those two out there and let
and I think to your point with data, I mean, and that's critical and for success in any industry. But I mean, to your point is that we do not have these RCTs, do not have access to RCTs. But what we do have, some great tech applications out there that are capturing patient data, and that is invaluable. What is the strain? What's the dosage amount? The frequency. So there is that is an excellent point. Dr. Klumpers, what do you have to say?
Yeah, so I heard that question, and it's still a little bit vague to me what your background is and indeed where you want to go. So where to go is really dependent on your background and where you want to go. There are so many different ways of getting where you want to go. I mean, it's on the one hand a matter of what is available. On the other hand, it's a matter of what do you want to do. So just to give one anecdote about myself personally is when I started working on cannabinoids, and that is now almost 15 years ago. What happened was very enthusiastically and this is no joke, I was preparing 12 clinical studies. And this was all in the antagonist area. So these cannabinoid antagonists were super popular back then, but all of a sudden, after some bad study results, I won't go into details, this whole research line was canceled. So my two PhD supervisors came to me and said, well, Linda, you can't continue any of your studies. You better just focus on the huge pile of work we have here at our research center on GABAergic actions and GABAergic drugs. So it's something still in neuropsychopharmacology, but a little bit different. And then at that moment, it was really, the logical thing was to say, okay, give me those studies and I'll continue, but that's not what I did. So I dove into a database that we had access to. Was really fortunate to have access to that on molecules. And I found this molecule that was very interesting, I thought. So it was also cannabinoid antagonist, but it would not really penetrate in your brain. So it was not able to induce, let's say, the negative side effects that the other compounds had. And I actually went to the company developing that compound and said, hey, we want to do a study with your compound, and that's what we did. And after that, more money came out of that study, so I was able to get some other studies done, funded from that same money. What I just want to say to you is that sometimes if you don't get the opportunity, you need to create it. That's maybe easier said than done. It's a lot of work. I've worked on so many things that did not work out. But honestly, if you have further questions about this, I can't tell you what to do. But if you want to brainstorm about something, whoever you are, you can contact me and I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you. Dr. Z.
Well, I think overall, the good news for anybody that's getting a degree in cannabis industry is, or in cannabinoids or in cannabinoid medicine, is that it is an emerging fast-growing field that is proving itself to be COVID and recession-proof. So as you see, you know, as young individuals that are getting your degrees and getting out there in the world, should I stay with it? Yes, you should. If this is your interest with cannabis, this is a great time to be a part of that industry. It's a great time to hone your professional skills with your professional degrees, because this wave now in 2020, this decade is going to be the decade where really serious people with degrees, with education are coming and being a part of this industry. For me, I think the fact is that it's also global business. So when you think about opportunities globally. Cannabis in Germany is sold in pharmacies. Medical cannabis in the United States is sold in dispensaries. Those are two very different worlds, and you can be a part of either one of them. Now, if you think about from innovation perspective or what to do in the future, I would maybe echo Dr. Dahmer, also formulations, condition-specific formulations, innovative formulations, microorganisms, and transdermal preparations. I think this is going to be some of the most cutting edge. How do microorganisms share the carbon chains to produce terpenoids and cannabinoids? How do microorganisms synthesize cannabinoids? How can we formulate them? How can we apply? My dream is to have what I call a terpume. It's a terpene cannabinoid perfume that if I could just put a little bit of that perfume on my neck, and it does it all. It introduces transdermally cannabinoids into my blood and gives me the effect of cannabinoids, the medicine. It makes me smell good. It has all of the terpenes that stimulate my psycho system and mental state as well. This is what you have to think about. You have to think about going to Mars, you know, and take the opportunities that are there, and like Dr. Klumpers said, create them, trailblaze.
Yeah. It is, you know, and going back to Dr. Dahmer, what you said, you know, dog ears, that's the one that I always use. You know, I say I climbed aboard a speeding rocket ship as an entrepreneur. CannabizMD, I launched it to support Maryland's nascent medical cannabis program. That MD, lots of folks thought that she's all about Maryland. True at the beginning, but the long game on medical cannabis. As an entrepreneur, the sky's the limit. I am not one of the youngsters in the program. I'm one of the oldsters in the program. And, you know, it's incredibly exciting to see, as I have been following cannabis for, and I say decades now, where we are. You know, it was really exciting for me where I actually had a ticket sale come in from one of my adult children. And I raised my kids with a very healthy awareness, and I'd hoped a respect for cannabis. Definitely at that time, illicit medicine that was in their home. I referred to it as mommy spices. I now understand that I was self-medicating, why I was. And now here we are on a legitimate scientific conversation. And it's just a relatively very short period of time. And again, what this decade is going to have in store for us. Dr. Z, actually, we had a question come in about exactly spot on of what you said, to speak to your thoughts on transdermal delivery. So could you give us a little bit more insight on that?
Sure. I mean, it's a delivery system. Dr. Dahmer essentially referred to it, is that it's going to be important how you deliver different substances. Transdermal bypasses the liver metabolism. That's why it's important. Anything that you ingest, you may encounter secondary liver metabolism. Anything that you ingest may get broken down by the gastric juices in the stomach. So when we talk about transdermal, it's one way of bypassing the metabolism and introducing the substances directly into the bloodstream. However, it is a medical device or medical preparation in a way, so it would either have to go through the over-the-counter or the FDA route for but it doesn't prevent for it being in the medical cannabis dispensaries as well, as long as it is properly designed and protected from the intellectual property perspective.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to thank everybody. I neglected to thank our sponsor, one of our supporters of the event, Potomac Holistic Cannabis Dispensary, located in, as the name applies, Potomac, Maryland. They have a commitment to delivering safe medicine for effective treatment for medical cannabis patients in Maryland. I would like to thank again the generosity, Dr. Z, Dr. Dahmer, Dr. Klumpers. Thank you so much for the generosity of your time. We spent some time on emails and discussion leading up to this. So also want to let everybody know to save the date, December 18th. We're actually going to be focused on CBD. What is the clinical efficacy of CBD and the research behind it? We've been talking a bit about it today, including both THC and CBD, but looking forward to that discussion on December 18th. And to the audience, you can find us again on Eventbrite. We're going to CannabizMD. We're sharing our events on Eventbrite. There are some challenges to the industry as far as sharing because it is Schedule I, it's federally illegal. However, again, more states, it is legal as a medicine than it's not, but nonetheless, it's a bit challenging to get our messaging out to folks. So look for CannabizMD on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Eventbrite. Dr. Z, any social media handles that folks could follow and search for you?
I think that the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Happy to connect through LinkedIn, and Adendox, ADENDOX.com is the website of my company, or you can find me at the University of Houston.
All right, great, thank you. And Dr. Klumpers?
Yes, also on LinkedIn, I always appreciate it if you write a little note there, because I get many invites, and it's often very random. So I would appreciate you introducing yourself or saying that it's via CannabizMD. And then my websites are Canify.us, so that's CANNIFY.us, and also verdientscience.com. Verdient is VERDIENT, excuse me, science.com.
Yeah. So, I actually will give a plug to Canify. There is a link through CannabizMD.com. It's really a fantastic resource for patients. So I plugged in what I was interested in treating and got back recommendations on, I believe, strains, on what to look for, terpene profiles, and what was, as a cannabis geek, a number of papers that to support the information behind it. Dr. Dahmer, how can folks find you and the information that and the studies that Vireo is part of?
So VireoHealth.com, www.vireohealth.com. I'm on all the social media channels. Twitter is probably more of my favorite. LinkedIn is definitely a favorite, but like Dr. Klumpers, a lot of requests. So introduce yourself. We're here to support, here to connect. I really appreciate Dr. Klumpers saying we're available. I'm sure Dr. Z is the same. I have an open door and always have. I'll try to get to an email or try to respond as quick as I can. And I'm here standing on the backs of giants. And so we want to certainly support those that are also going in this path. And thank you, Jackie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And again, thank you so much for generosity of your time, and everybody, enjoy your day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.